Hi, guys, and welcome back to the Backstage Bikini podcast with your host, Jade. Now, it is just going to be my voice this time round, similarly to Grace. And if you haven't checked her podcast out, her most recent one in relation to body image and body dysmorphia, please go and listen to it. It is an incredible share and one that's extremely vulnerable and extremely relatable as well. I myself, even as Grace's co-host, I was quite moved by a lot of it and quite affected by a lot of it in the sense that I really understood where she was coming from. So yeah, if you haven't gone and checked that out, please do, and make sure that you share any feedback with her. But today I want to come on and speak to you specifically about what struggles I've had over the last 9 months. Grace and I have spoken and connected quite a lot in relation to our post-show experiences over the last couple of months. Now, the circumstances, albeit very different, I think we've both had difficulties and struggles in relation to our relationship with bodybuilding and whether we've been able to commit to it the way that we have done previously. So I just wanted to come on and share what has been going on with me, really. It's a little bit of an update / a lesson, I guess, that I'm still very much learning, and I think I will continue to learn. It's not the first time I've come into this situation before. So to break it down, basically, what I want to speak about today is about stepping back from bodybuilding. Now, for a bodybuilding podcast, probably not the topic that you expected me to come out with. However, it's very much been something that has happened to me over the last 9 months. And I'm saying it's happened to me because it certainly was not the plan at all. So my most recent competitive season, if you've listened to the podcast previously, you probably have heard myself and Grace talk about our seasons and our competitive journeys. But my most recent one was May and June. So my shows were May and June 2022. So it was just last year, less than a year ago. Now, this time last year, I was on prep. I am getting all of the memories through of me getting tinier and tinier and tinier, which is incredible. I love seeing that progress and I love seeing those memories because I have very fond ones of bodybuilding at the moment, irrespective of whether I couldn't be further away from it if I tried. But nevertheless, I competed in May and June, start of June of last year. Now, I had a really, really successful off season before that competitive season. Now, that was basically springboarded off the back of a really, really awful showing from me in 2021. I stepped off stage that year and I felt crushed. In 2021, I hadn't done my best. I didn't show my best. I wasn't lean by any stretch. And I laugh about it a lot now. I do laugh about it because I learned a lot about myself and my capabilities and how much I really wanted this and enjoyed the sport and enjoyed the challenges that came with it. So I learned a lot about myself in that season and on the back of that season. And my off season going into my most recent competitive season last year completely transformed my life. Sounds really corny, but it really did. Everything made a shift in the right direction. I was very focused. I was very committed. I was very excited, and I thoroughly enjoyed myself, even though I didn't skip a meal. I didn't miss a beat. I still enjoyed myself with like off-plan meals and going out with friends and things like that. But everything was in tune and in alignment with what I wanted to achieve last year, which was stepping on stage with a completely different physique. Now, I smashed it. Dare I say it? By my own standards, I did what I set out to do. Very much so. And the pride that I felt, I mean, I cried before I stepped on stage last year. So the pride that I felt as a byproduct of transforming my life and my habits and my routine to the degree in which I did, and to actually see that pay off in the long haul, was something that I was incredibly proud of. And as I say, I was extremely emotional going into my shows because I proved it to myself. I'd proved to myself what I was capable of, what I could do, how much I had committed to that season. And I very much had that intention coming out of that competitive season as well. So the initial plan for me was to probably take an 8 to 9 month off season-ish, push as hard as I could, similarly to what I'd done the season before, completely transformed my training. So to push that and continue to improve that, improve my commitment, improve my progress really within the sport, and to really hit the ground running on the back of a really successful season for me. So that was what I really wanted to do. Now, I'm sure I'm not the first and I won't be the last, but life threw curveball after curveball after curveball from around July. So I won't go too much into it because it's still all very raw and very personal for me. But over the last 9 months, I've had blunder after blunder when it comes to my family and their health and losses and things like that. And it started in July, losing my granddad. And I won't play the tiniest violin in the world, but subsequently, people closest to me, my parents, have gotten really poorly or been really poorly and have been hospitalized and had really serious conditions. And the most recent sort of blunder, if you like, was in January with my dad. And he is extremely poorly now. To the degree in which myself and my family are probably going to have the hardest and the most challenging time of our entire existence moving forward now. And it's an unknown length of time. We know that there's no light at the end of the tunnel. We're not necessarily going to move past this, but we are certainly going to have to deal with it. So that has completely, understandably, pulled me away from bodybuilding. Now, to give you an indication of how different my life is, I haven't been prepping meals up until recently. I think I designed my own program, my own meal program. Actually, let's backtrack. We'll start from the beginning. So shortly after losing my granddad, because of the degree in which I had pulled away from bodybuilding, even at that time, it was something that was really traumatic. We spent several days, well, just under a week, camped out at the hospital with him before he passed. And my diet constituted of like pork pies and hobnob biscuits and packaged sandwiches, or like the pasties, the cold ones that you can get in the vending machines at hospitals. So for the best part of 10 days, that was my diet. My steps were only the steps that I took to go and get other family members' food away from my granddad's bed because I didn't move from it. And it just all sort of unraveled. And that was very, very, very close. Like if you remember the timeline that I spoke about at the start of this podcast, that's extremely close. That was 6 weeks post-show. So my body was still extremely sensitive at that time. It was still very sensitive. It was struggling to cope with what I was doing to it. And irrespective of me understanding that what I was doing wasn't optimal, it wasn't conducive to the goals that I'd set for myself in terms of my bodybuilding goals, I still couldn't bring myself to do anything different because I needed to be where I was. I needed to be there for my family. I needed to be a daughter. I needed to be a granddaughter. I needed to be a sister. You get it? Like I had to be something other than a bodybuilder at that time. So it was that, I guess, that was the catalyst for where things started to progressively go a little bit away from bodybuilding. But at that point, I was still very committed to it. I thought, okay, you've had 10 days that aren't optimal. They're not great. You're probably going to have a little bit more time that's going to be a little bit unsteady. But in the grand scheme of things, 2 to 3 weeks, that's not work that can be undone. That's certainly something that, yes, okay, it's not optimal, but we can get back on track and it'll be fine. So I was still very much committed to things at that point, as I say, carried on working with my coach, Meg, and we slowly but surely headed no less than 6 weeks after that into another hospital situation with another family member, and my mum had a heart attack. Now, again, it was just a repeat of the 6 weeks prior to that. It was running to and from hospital. It was making sure that my dad ate. It was making sure that my sisters were okay and they were emotionally supported whilst trying to emotionally support myself at that time. The gym had dropped off completely. I didn't have the energy psychologically or physically, didn't have the energy to be doing anything. And it, as I say, it was just a repeat. It was like looking in the mirror 6 weeks ago, and I thought I'd moved past this. Like I'd been able to move on from what had happened, in the sense that I'd regained some sort of structure and some sort of normality, and it was just being derailed again. Now, that wasn't my family's fault, but the guilt I carried for not being a bodybuilder, not being, like, hell, I didn't even feel like a gym person at that point. I wasn't getting my steps in. I wasn't getting my meals in. I wasn't getting my gym sessions in. I didn't want to either, which was something that was really hard for me. I found it really difficult and really conflicting in my mind, because I knew from a moral standpoint that I needed to be exactly where I was. It was important for me to be doing what I was doing, for my family, for myself to be exactly where I was in both instances. But the pressure and the guilt I carried week by week, checking in with my coach at the time, being reminded that I was so far away from what I was the year before, from the person and the athlete that I'd become, that I'd formed, all of the structure and the habits that I'd put in place are completely unraveled. And on the back of a prep as well, if you can appreciate anybody that's been in a prep, if you haven't been in a prep and you're due to, you will very much understand where I'm coming from. Your life is so regimented. Even though you can't control everything, a lot of it is well within your control, and you shut everything else out to a degree, or I certainly do. So going from having a period of 4 or 5 months where everything was neat, it was specific. I knew exactly where I was on what day. I knew what meals I was eating. I didn't miss a beat. For me to be repeatedly every 6 weeks or so just having a complete meltdown and stopping everything that I held valuable in my life at that point, for justified reasons, but because I'd stopped that, the psychological pressure and upset it caused me was just something that I didn't quite expect. Now, I would like to say it got easier from there, but it hasn't. I made a decision the back end of last year to completely pull away from being coached. The reason I pulled away in the first instance was I thought I needed a bit of a break. I thought I needed to stop being hard on myself. I needed to stop expecting myself to be able to do the things that I knew that I needed to do in order to be successful. I thought that taking a step back might allow me to regenerate that want and that sort of buzz and that motivation to get back into bodybuilding, into prioritizing those goals, because so many of them had dropped off. And I think with the circumstances in my life at that point, I'd sort of looked at things and thought, okay, where do my true values lie? Where do my true wants and passions lie? I am not just a bodybuilder, I'm also a daughter and everything else. So I think I struggled a lot to accept that, but then having spoken to my friends and things like that at the time, I think I'd accepted that perhaps I just needed a break to allow myself some room to think about it, to regroup, to gather myself, to go at it again. So at that point, I stopped coaching altogether with Meg. It was a really tough decision, and it was quite honestly a really scary decision. I had never at that point, up until that point, done any of this without the guidance of a coach. I'd always had that accountability. I'd always had that identity. I was an athlete. I was being coached. The minute I took that away, I didn't feel like an athlete anymore. I didn't feel like a bodybuilder anymore. I just felt like a person, and a very lost one at that. As much as bodybuilding had brought so much structure and so much positivity and discipline to my life, the minute I removed a coach, I felt like all of that fell out of my butt, quite literally. So moving into the new year, I had sort of had a little bit of a break. and I approached one of my close friends about potentially looking at coaching going forward. And you will know exactly who he is. Or if you don't, I don't know what rock you've been hiding under, but I spoke to Oscar Young at the time about potentially picking up coaching later down the line once I'd just got myself settled and got myself back into a routine and just let the dust settle from everything that had happened in the sort of 4 to 5 months prior to that. So, and I remember vividly sitting down with Oscar, and he grilled me. He asked me question after question after question about what I wanted, what did happiness look like to me, what did structure look like to me, what did my goals look like to me now. And a lot of my answers were quite honestly laughable now. If you look back at them, it's almost like somebody had wrote them out for me. So I know that I will feel better when I can get in the gym 4 to 5 times a week, complete a full week or a full cycle of my training program. I'll feel better, and I know I'll feel more focused when I can hit all of my meals and I'm being more productive. And it was complete bollocks. Quite honestly, complete bollocks, because even though all of those things were in my control, because of the impact of what happened previously and how far I'd pulled away from the things that I had known just a mere matter of months before, things that had come so naturally to me at that time, because I was so far away from that, the building blocks had completely shattered. Like they required building again. We were back at the foundation level. We had no structure. We had no routine. We had no habits. They had been flown right out of the window. So to even contemplate looking at rebuilding that at that time was a long shot. But I was adamant that I thought that that would be what brought me focus back and structure back and some control back in my life. So at that time, Oscar quite rightly pointed out to me that I didn't need a coach at all. I didn't even need to be a bodybuilder at that time. There was so much that had happened, so much that I wasn't dealing with. And I was very much using bodybuilding as a tool, I guess, to redirect my focuses or redirect my attention away from what had been happening, just to use it as a coping mechanism almost. But even at that point, I still wasn't utilizing it as a coping mechanism. I wasn't even able to get into the gym at that point. I didn't want to be there. So to think that forcing my hand by getting a coach in place again to make me accountable, to make me do this, even though it hadn't worked previously, I thought that it would. But friends and Oscar being a close one at that told me that was not what I needed. I just needed to be a human being. And at that time, I remember walking away and going back up to my bedroom, up to my flat rather, and I tucked myself away in my bedroom after that chat. And I haven't cried like that in such a long time, hand on heart. And I was just beside myself because he was right. He was right about what I needed to be and what I needed to do and where my attention and my energy needed to be. He reminded me that I just needed to take care of myself. I needed to be there for my family. I needed to support my mum. She'd just undergone a stent being fitted, so her lifestyle had changed substantially. She was recovering, and that was like a 12-week process in itself. She couldn't even lift and like hoover for the first couple of weeks. So I was ferrying to and from my flat in Manchester to my parents' home as well. I had no set place or set sort of gym or anything like that. Certainly had no structure in terms of my food. I was just eating as and when I could. So, but because of that, and because it had been highlighted to me that that lifestyle that I'd known for the last 3 years just wasn't achievable and wasn't obtainable at this moment in time. I probably shouldn't be, because it was going to be misused. I was shattered because I didn't know what to do. Didn't know what to do. I didn't know who I was. And this brings me to my point quite longly. Sorry, it's taken a while for me to get there, but my identity was so fixed on being a bodybuilder that even though I was a daughter, even though I was a sister, even though I was a friend or whoever else I am to other people around me, a worker and things like that, work colleague. I didn't know how to do all of that without the fundamentals, without the core existence of my being a bodybuilder, being a person who trains hard, being a person who gets shredded and competes, because I love the challenge and I love to discipline myself and I love to put myself and in situations where I'm bettering myself all the time, because I didn't have the capacity to do that anymore in terms of the physical or mental capacity to commit the time that I used to and that I know is necessary. I felt completely lost. And it's not the first time it's happened. I was a dancer as a young child, and from being the age of 3 up until sort of 15, when I was injured in the first instance, I injured my lower back by plonking myself, is probably the best word, or throwing myself on the sofa, and I just hit the bottom of my back off a wooden backboard and shot straight back up. And I couldn't dance for the best part of a year. I think my parents had funded it for probably a lengthy amount of time, a little bit too long perhaps, because I was absolutely adamant that I wasn't giving up on it, but I wasn't dancing. I was stood at the front. I had my head and my lower arms and my back completely neutral for most of my classes because I couldn't actually bend it. I couldn't use it. And I remember sitting in my dance teacher's office when I was 16. And again, in that instance, the plan was to audition for schools, for dancing schools, to go off to dancing college. And that had been my goal from being sort of 5. And all of a sudden, all of that was completely flipped on its head because I couldn't actually do it. Couldn't actually perform. I couldn't dance. I was physically incapable of doing so. And I remember sitting in my dance teacher's office and just floods tears again, like, I can't do this anymore. I can't ask my parents to pay for it. I can't ask my parents to ferry me to and from. So I had to quit. Now, at that time, I carried on doing dancing. I went to university and studied it instead. It wasn't at the same level. And I ended up resenting it eventually, because even though I had still participated or still had the option to participate, it wasn't the same. It wasn't the same, and I ended up resenting it. Now, fast forward to bodybuilding. Here we are in a similar, not the same circumstance, but for me now, re-entering bodybuilding and the thought of even committing to a full off season at this point, let alone a prep, is a very, very distant memory or distant goal for me at the minute. So much so that I can't even put a likely time frame on it. I could tell you when I would like to. I could tell you that until I'm blue in the face, but the likelihood is of it actually coming off is probably slim, because, as I say, with my dad's health now, we have no way of knowing what that is going to look like and what the next week, 2 weeks, months, years, if we get them, are going to look like. So for me, I wanted to share not necessarily just my really bad sob story from sort of July last year to now, but I wanted to share my feelings around losing the thing that I love doing the most. And it's been awful. It's been really challenging. And I think I'd be lying if I said that I was over it and I was out of it yet, because I really am not. It's been the guilt that I've carried for not being able to do something that I'm really passionate about and something that I was preaching to other people about. And even now I walk into the office and people who haven't quite copped on to the fact that I've done some competing previously will have come across my pictures and been like, oh my God, I didn't know you did this. And I still have that identity with other people. I still absolutely flood my Instagram with pictures of me competing, even though I am now sat at my heaviest weight. I am 19 kilos above stage weight, which is the heaviest that I have ever been. And again, it's another thing that just reiterated how far I had fallen away from who I was and what I was doing less than a year ago. Now, as I say, the guilt and the pressures that have come with that have been unbearable in some circumstances. But I really wanted to share it because I think irrespective of whether you face a situation like I have, where your circumstances and what's happening around you has made you have to pull away from it, from bodybuilding or from committing yourself to a prep or whatever it may be. If you find yourself in a circumstance, whether it's via an injury, whether it's via circumstances, whether it is a redirection of your goals to start a family with your partner or whatever it may be, I don't think that anybody is going to be completely exempt from the feelings that I've felt, and the lack of identity and the feeling of losing that identity, I think, is probably the most profound way of explaining it and how it's felt for me. It's felt like I don't know who I am anymore because I've lost something that formed such a large part of my life. And I think it's taught me a lot about how much I put that lifestyle and that goal on a pedestal. Sorry. It's okay to prioritize your goals. And I think in bodybuilding, it's extremely important to prioritize your goals, especially if they're big ones. You've got to go at them. You have to go at them. And I'm not for 1 minute saying that you should take them less seriously, that you should apply yourself less. You shouldn't. You should throw everything you've physically got at it, so long as you've got the time, the energy, and the resources to do it. What I think is important to remember is that if for any reason you are pulled away from that goal, whether it's within your control or whether it's not, you are still a person. You are still a human being. You're still an athlete. You're still a person that works out incredibly well. You still have all of the characteristics that you had as an athlete. You just get the luxury of applying them in a different setting. And I think that is something, as I say, is something I'm still really trying to reinforce and remind myself on a daily basis, that discipline, that tenacity, that commitment to bodybuilding can be transferred to anything that you do in your life, whether that be your work or whether that be your commitment to your family. It can all be transferred. It's not lost. And I definitely felt like I'd lost the outlet. So if this serves as nothing but a reminder to people that everything that makes you the athlete that you believe you are and can be is also what contributes to making you the person that you are. And just because you can't be an athlete for any length of time, no matter what the reason, doesn't mean that you as a person are diminished because of that. Bodybuilding has added and contributed a hell of a lot to who I am. And just because I can't be in it right this second doesn't mean that I won't ever do it again. And it also doesn't mean that I can't do it anymore. It just means that right now it doesn't fit. What I'm doing, who I am, who I need to be, and where I need to be doesn't align with that goal. And as I say, it's not to say that it never will. But right now I would be incredibly selfish and misguided, I think, if I was to prioritize bodybuilding or a prep. And I know there's information out there that gets shared about the fact that life still happens when you're a bodybuilder, and I completely agree. Life does happen to you. Bad things will happen to you on a prep. I lost my dog, who I'd had for like 14 years, 2 weeks before my first ever show. So you're not immune to things like that. Things may crop up. And if things like that happen, it doesn't mean that you have to quit. And I wouldn't ever encourage anybody to quit or to step away when they're so close, when you've worked for such a long time to achieve something like that. Again, that's not what I'm saying is okay to do. But at the same time, I think as much as you can be immersed in this community, and the community is incredible, and everybody's like-minded and everybody's ruthless, and they all have the determination and the tenacity that you share. That's what brings you close together. So many of my friends, and some of my closest friends that I've got right now, I've met through bodybuilding. So they're like-minded, and in a lot of ways, that community can really keep you going. But if you feel at any stage that a line has to be drawn and that you can't commit yourself 100% to bodybuilding for whatever reason that may be, let this be a reminder to you that that's okay. And if it never comes back again, that's okay. For most of us, this is a glorified hobby. And for me, it certainly is. It doesn't pay a wage. And there are very few things that I would have said a year ago that would have pulled me away from this sport. There'd be very few things that I would admit to defeat, I guess. And I still very much feel like it's a defeat. That's something that I do need to reframe and readjust to, and sort of work on the internal feedback around that. But as I say, there's very few things that I would have given you that I would have accepted to have been a reason why I didn't do this, and that I took a step back from it as far as I have right now. But right now, it's a very different story. Very different story. And this is the thing, life changes. So in a roundabout way, that's what I wanted to talk about. I wanted to talk about life beyond bodybuilding, because I do believe that it will happen to everybody. There are professional athletes out there that have done it. There are amateur athletes that have done it. It doesn't always have to be for a negative reason. It doesn't always have to be because bodybuilding's awful and it's ruined my life and my relationship with food or my body or anything like that. It doesn't have to be an impact like that. It can be a life impact. It can be something that you choose to do. It can be prioritizing your fertility. If bodybuilding starts to present a problem, no matter what that reason is, it's okay to take a step back from bodybuilding. You are no less of an athlete. You are no less of a person just because you have chosen to prioritize something else. And I think, again, part of my struggle has been the acceptance of, and this sounds awful in the circumstances, like if you actually listen to what I'm saying and how I've been treating myself, these are family members. This is time that I may never get back with family members, that my dad's on a limited amount of time potentially now, and I'm criticizing myself for prioritizing that. I mean, and that in itself is a reason why I can't do this right now. And I just wanted to share the feelings, because I think, like I said, I don't think anyone will be immune from them. For whatever reason you step away, I think that some of us, or most of us, may feel like this at some point. And I wanted to share them because I think it's important to say the things that are hard to say. And as difficult as this has been and will continue to be, I think, I just wanted to make sure that I was honest and vulnerable enough to make a space for somebody that, if they're in a similar circumstance, or if they're questioning whether they even want to do this anymore, then you're not on your own. And as I say, as much as it is something that I really want to do, again, right now, my training looks nothing like a bodybuilder's training. I've done 2 bootcamp classes this week. I haven't lifted a weight other than a 7.5 kilo dumbbell in a HIIT class. And it's completely changed how I look at things. I think everything that I'm doing right now it has got absolutely no correlation to what I would like to do in the future, but it fits me right now. And I think it's important to just be present, irrespective of whether you are completely immersed in bodybuilding and whether you are in a prep right now. I apologize. I'm probably dumping all over the bodybuilding experience right now. I really don't mean to. But irrespective of whether you're there or whether you're in a similar circumstance to me, or whether you've just tried it and it's not for you, or you don't feel like you enjoy actually participating, but it's still a passion, still something you're interested in following, then always remember that whatever you're doing, make sure that you're happy doing it. Make sure that you are not killing yourself, that you're not feeling the feelings that I've explained today, in order to continue occupying that space, because what is fundamentally important is that you're happy. and that you're enjoying yourself and that the sport is not taking more than it's giving. And it just got to a point where I couldn't give as much as I needed to give to it. And that's the top and bottom of it. But it's accepting that that's okay. And there are going to be times in your life that, yes, you should push on, and yes, you should get out of your own way. But then equally, there are going to be times in your life where you need to take a step back because what you're doing is not going to help. And that includes this space, unfortunately, for me right now. So that was pretty emotional. And I hope it made sense. I hope I explained it well enough, because it is and has been something that I've really struggled to explain and to verbalize to people, because I am still so passionate about the sport, and I still enjoy watching the sport, and I still have sort of goals to step back on stage. So I think I get fearful that I could potentially come across as contradictory about what I believe is necessary to actually participate in this sport and in this space. But I think I would be a hypocrite if I didn't acknowledge that I'm not meeting those requirements right now for myself. And equally, I think it's important to note that even if you're not meeting those requirements, if you've identified that and you've chosen to take a step back, that doesn't make you any less of an athlete. It just makes you incredibly self-aware. And you are preserving energy and refocusing it in places that you deem more necessary. And that doesn't mean that you're not hardcore, that you don't take this seriously, that you're not an athlete and you're not in it. It just means that your priorities have taken a shift and they are being redirected to places where you need them to be most. And there's nobody on this planet that can tell you that that's not okay. So that is a very emotional podcast for me. I've shared a lot of things that perhaps people don't know. So I hope that it helps somebody. I hope it gives somebody the resources or the courage to stand by their decisions. If you've chosen to take a leaf out of my book, perhaps, or you've had to do something similar, or if you're just not enjoying it and you've taken a step back just to regroup and recollect yourself and see whether it's something that you want to participate again in. I hope that whatever I've said today and the feelings that I've shared will encourage somebody to be settled and happy in that decision. But yeah, that is a wrap, I think. Thank you so much for listening. If you've made it this far, you are an absolute hero. But we have some really exciting guests on the podcast. And as I say, this podcast has given myself and Grace, I can speak for Grace, I know I can, an incredible amount of comfort, an incredible amount of passion and happiness and joy and connectivity to something that we both still, as much as it's been a challenge to connect with recently, we still very much feel connected to. So it's just a big appreciation. Comment really just to say thank you to everybody who is listening, who is supporting the podcast, who is sharing it. You have made this a reality, and it's been a lifeline for myself and Grace over the last couple of months. So huge thank you. Tune in for the next episode. As I say, we've got some incredible guests on. Please reach out to myself and Grace if you have any feedback or anybody that you are desperate to hear their story. But yeah, that's my 2 pence on stepping away from bodybuilding. Thank you for listening. Take care, guys. Bye.